The night had sharpened its edge on the parapets of the Red Keep. A thin salt wind off Blackwater Bay slipping through arrow slits to stir the rushes on the floor. Ned Stark sat with his broken leg aching and an open book of lineages heavy in his lap. By firelight the ink turned almost brown, page after yellow page of marriages and begettings, the sort of dry work that let a man think. He had read and reread the names until they blurred, until Baratheon black and Lannister gold became simple colors in his mind's eye. Black and gold, as relentless as a drum. Outside, the city was restless. He had been long enough in King's Landing to know the feel of a city holding its breath. The knock at his door came soft and quick. He did not call out. The door opened a hand's width, then another. Candlelight flared, carrying with it the warm scent of beeswax and the faintest trace of rose oil. Renly Baratheon closed the door with his back and slid the bolt as if he had done it 100 times. Behind him the Knight of Flowers, pretty as a painting, lingered just inside the threshold. Helm under one arm, curls still damp from a bath. "Lord Stark," Renly said, the corners of his mouth an easy curve that did not reach his eyes. "I will not waste your time." Ned shut the book and set it aside. The splint on his leg tugged at his skin when he adjusted in the chair. "Yours or mine? We share the same trouble." Renly came forward without waiting to be invited. The candle he held trembled for a heartbeat when he set it down, then burned clean and steady. "You know what the Queen is, and you know who those children are. So do I." Loras Tyrell moved like a shadow to take a place near the wall, where he could watch the door. He said nothing. The rose on his surcoat looked almost black in the low firelight, and there was a sword at his hip that had never been anything but well kept. "If you know," Ned said, "why have you said nothing?" Renly gave a short laugh without joy. "To whom? To my brother? He is not here. To the small council? Half of them sell whispers for breakfast and their souls before supper. To the Queen? She would smile and drink to it, then feed me to the wolves. No." His gaze settled on Ned, bright and hungry. "I have 60 men who would die for me. You told me 50 before. Then I have found 10 men who were willing to become brave today." Renly's mouth quirked, a boy's face wearing a man's ambitions. "It is enough. We take the children in their sleep. We protect them. Come dawn, we present their mother with a choice she cannot like and cannot refuse. I will not see Joffrey crowned. I will not see a Lannister boy on the Iron Throne while my brother lives." Ned's hands were steady on the arms of the chair. He could hear, beneath the crackle of the fire, the faint soughing of the city. Some mule cart grinding uphill, some man laughing too loudly, the slap of a night watch's feet on cobbles. He thought of boys with hair like coal under summer sun. He thought of a cold, iron smell in a tower at Winterfell and the shape of a promise that had lived so long in him it was part of his bones. "They are children," he said. "Then all the more reason to keep them safe," Renly replied, quick as a striking snake. "The Queen will play a mother and call us monsters. Let her. Monsters are the men who allow a civil war to flower because they were too timid to pluck a few buds. I know what I ask of you, but I have learned that if you wait for justice, you end up with whatever the clever leave you. Will you act?" The easy thing would have been to say no and continue in the line of his own nature. Honor had a shape, and he knew it the way he knew the way a sword balanced in his palm. But honor had been taught to him by men who had lived in a quieter age, and the world did not stay quiet for long. He saw again Robert's broad hand smashing a wine jug, Robert's laughter at his shoulder in the first years when they had still been young and not yet kings of anything. He saw his friend impaled on a boar's tusks, skin flushed with wine and pride, a reckoning galloping toward them from the dark. The book of lineages lay like a weight of proof at his knee. Ned Stark lifted his chin as if he were in his own hall in the north and said simply, "Very well." Renly's breath went out of him in a short, startled exhalation that could have been a laugh. Loras's gaze moved, just enough that Ned knew it was not a statue in his rose and satin. "Then we go now," Renly said. "I want them in your tower before moonrise." "Not Tommen," Ned said. "The plan is Joffrey and the girl. Renly nodded once. Tommen's rooms are under heavy watch near the Queen's. To move for him as well is to rattle every hawk in the mews. We will make do. Ned sent for his household guards with a bell pull and his steward with another. Fat Tom came first and looked baffled, then grim when he read Ned's face. Desmond was quick behind him, and Harwin, and others whose names had become familiar as their loyalties had hardened around him. They had lost Jory. The loss still bled. They did not ask to whom they were to bend their blades tonight, and Ned loved them for it. Quietly, he told them, "We go to keep the king's children safe. No man draws steel unless I do. We will not be the first to spill blood." Renly cocked a brow. "And if someone else is? Then you keep them from doing it." Ned stood, bracing on the arm of his chair and refusing to show how the leg bit at him. "Loras, where will you place your men?" "In the shadows," the young knight said, his voice soft with amusement. "Where every flower grows best." They moved. The corridors of the Red Keep at night were a world unto themselves. Tapestries hanging like sleeping giants along the walls. Servants ghosting from one duty to the next with lamps held low so as not to blind themselves when they turned a corner. Renly's men in green and gold drifted out of side passage. In twos and threes, as if they had been waiting in the stones. The air had the faint tang of the sea, and Ned remembered how the mists at Winterfell held the smell of earth instead. Maegor's holdfast was a black crouching thing in the moonlight. The dry moat gaped like a mouth. The drawbridge was up, as it nearly always was at night, the iron underbelly bristling with spikes. The Queen had not yet retreated to those deep rooms like a brooding hen, but the children's chambers were within easy call of her apartments. The guard at the Bridge House wore the gold cloak of the city watch. Janos Slint had been seen drinking with Littlefinger in the afternoon, laughing too loudly. Ned approached with Renly at his shoulder and the household badge of the direwolf plain on his doublet. "Lord Stark," the watchman said, surprise sharpening to wariness. His partner set his hand to a spear. "The hand of the king requires a word with the princess and the prince," Renly said smoothly, before Ned opened his mouth. His smile showed teeth. "Household business. The king returns on the morrow with a boar under his arm, and there will be gifts to give and words to say. You wouldn't deny him the right to surprise his own children, would you?" The watchman's eyes shifted between them, then toward the shape of Loras Tyrell where he leaned with casual disrespect against a shadowed arch at this hour. "My lord?" "The Queen," Ned said. "The safety of the royal children is my charge." "Open." The man hesitated one fraction too long. Loras unfastened the thong that tied down his sword in an unhurried motion that was somehow threatening by its grace alone. Renly's candlelight smile did not waver. Ned contemplated the eternal folly of men, who must be persuaded of simple duties, and wondered whose purse had so recently been heavy in this one's hand. There is a kind of mercy in clarity. The watchman licked his lips and waved to the winchman. Chains rattled and the bridge came down one slow foot's breadth at a time until it crashed into place with a teeth-jarring thud. Renly's men swallowed the crossing like a tide. They split at the inner hall. Harwin and two of Renly's men went toward Joffrey's rooms, Loras and a handful toward the princess's. Ned moved slower and sent Fat Tom ahead with a low, cautioning growl to keep steel in sheath and mouths shut. He could hear the hush of servants shuffling backwards into doorways as they passed, faces turned away, eyes following. The Red Keep was a place where eyes always followed. They reached the prince's door as Harwin shouldered inside. The chamber was soft with silk and dim with banked coals. A boy's crown and a child's pride both lay on a table in untidy companionship with a dagger and a goblet. Joffrey slept on his side, blonde hair gilded by the firelight, lips parted in the careless way of the young who have never doubted anything. The hound sat in a chair near the bed, boots up on a stool, a ragged shadow of a man with half his face a map of suffering. His eyes opened before the door latch had finished creaking. "Who comes creeping?" Sandor Clegane's voice had the rasp of a saw through seasoned oak. His hand went to his sword and stopped there, heavy as iron. Harwin's palm lifted in a placating gesture. "By order of the hand, we..." "By order of the hand," Sandor repeated. He leaned forward into the light so that the ruined flesh of his cheek, his earless stump, and the half-mask of burned scars were all plain. What does the hand want with a sleeping boy? Joffrey stirred and muttered something that might have been a curse, then rolled and blinked bleary. He saw men at his door, men in green and in dusky colors, a direwolf badge that was not yet his to hate as he would learn to hate it, and he came awake like a cat roused by a dog. What is this? His voice cracked. He lurched up, one hand finding the dagger at the bedside table. Sandor stood without hurry. Ned stepped forward. Your Grace. The words were correct because the boy believed them and because words can be a bridge or a blade depending on how they're used. We are here to escort you to the Tower of the Hand. You will be safe there tonight. Joffrey's eyes went narrow. He had his mother's tilt to his chin and some of his father's breadth in the shoulders, but none of Robert's good humor softened him. I will not go. The dagger's point wavered as he brought it up. Mother! Sandor's sword made a sound like winter-cutting rope. Loras Tyrell's movement was a suggestion, not a threat, a petal drifting loose. Yet somehow he was there, interposing himself before the boy with his hands open and no weapon drawn. Sweet prince, he said mildly, do not shout. We are friends to your house. Let us keep you from harm. Joffrey's mouth twisted. My harm is before me, he said, and now his voice did not crack. He spat at Loras, an ugly, wet thing. The hound's laugh clanked like something dropped into a well. Renly murmured a warning from the door. Sandor, Ned said, and he shifted weight against his own cane of a leg. I will not see harm come to the prince. No, the hound's eyes did not leave Joffrey. That is a good start. It was the tone, maddening, faintly amused, that did it. Joffrey, enraged by something he could not shape or name, lunged with the dagger. Loras stepped in close and took the boy's wrist with such gentleness that it looked almost like a dance. A twist, a roll of the shoulder, and the blade came free and was in Loras's hand. Joffrey gasped more from insult than pain. He struck out with his other hand and found himself pressed face down to the coverlet, Loras's knee between his shoulder blades, his arm bent behind him. The hound had moved not at all. You think yourself better than me? Joffrey snarled into the bedding. You prance. I do, Loras said, and something unlovely passed under his pretty voice and was gone. And a man is better than a boy at most things. My lord hand, bring Im, Ned said. Without marks, Harwin went to each of the boy's boots and turned them out with his toe, feeling for knives concealed. He found none. Joffrey continued to spit threats that were bravado-covered fear. When they hauled him up, Loras kept one hand firm on the back of his neck, as if guiding a colt. Sandor rose and took 3 steps. They met each other's eyes, and in that small span a choice was made, invisible and hard. The hound stood aside. That's done, Sandor said. Do not make me regret it. Ned did not thank him. He did not dare debt with men like that, not in such a house with such ears. When they had the prince in hand, he sent Renly for Myrcella and passed in the wake of his own men down corridors that had seemed friendlier an hour ago and now felt like the throat of a great beast. Myrcella came quietly when Loras returned with her. The princess's hair spilled down her back like melted gold. She kept her hands clenched together at her waist and her eyes very wide. Am I in danger? She asked Ned in a small voice that made something tug in his chest. Not while I am near, he answered. This is to keep you safe. She believed him because children believe when you look at them directly and speak without crookedness. That did not stop her from glancing once behind her toward the passage where a shadow might have been her mother's shape, tall and angry and coming like a storm on high hills. They brought both children through Maegor's holdfast and over the bridge before the alarm took. A serving woman with hair like straw flattened herself against the wall as they passed and then flew down the passage to vanish into some side door. Ned could feel the message racing ahead of them to the Queen, could feel the first thin tightening of the city's sinews. When they reached the Tower of the Hand, Fat Tom barred the door himself and set men on every stair. Joffrey raged when he saw the room they had made ready for him. Its windows faced the sea, and the air that moved through them smelled of salt and little else. The bed had been stripped of its hangings, so there were no hiding places, and the rugs were rolled. Joffrey shoved a chair, tipped it, kicked the legs apart in ugly frustration. "I will have your heads, all of you. I will make you watch while my men—" "You have no men," Harwin said, and then his look to Ned asked forgiveness he would never ask in words. Ned allowed the faintest flicker of a nod and wondered when he had grown used to the taste of promises that were not exactly true. Myrcella's room was gentler, made up with care, and a bowl of sweetmeats set near the bed because that seemed a kindness a child might see as such. She accepted nothing, sitting very straight on the edge of the mattress, hands folded in her lap. She looked at Ned and then down. "May I have my septa?" she asked after the first silence had passed and grown thin and taut. "Yes," Ned said. "Septa Mordain will attend you if she chooses." When Septa Mordain arrived, puffed and scandalized in equal measure, he sent her in with the girl and posted Harwin outside, where his long, patient face gave nothing away. Cersei came an hour later like a drawn sword. She did not knock. She did not need to, not with half the small council at her shoulder. The old man Pycelle, pink with outrage, Peter Baelish with his mockingbird in his eyes like clean glass, and Varys, who was, as always, precisely as he wanted to be and nothing more. When she saw the barred door behind which her children were safe in someone else's keeping, a quick feral grief flashed, gone at once behind cold green. "What do you think to accomplish?" the queen said. She did not look at Renly. She did not look at Ned's leg. She looked deliberately the way a cat looks at birds from a bower. "Safety," Ned said. "For your children." "You lie." She took a step forward, and the gold ornaments at her waist chimed against one another. Peter drifted behind her like a smear of oil across water. "You think to take my son's crown? Is this your northern justice?" "The king returns on the morrow," Ned said. "He will judge all that must be judged. You will have them back when he commands it." Pycelle was wagging his jaw. "The king entrusted me." "The king entrusted things he should not have." Renly cut in with a smile that had more blade than sweetness in it. "Tonight we entrust the children to a man who does not sell secrets for coin." At that Peter laughed aloud, as if he were delighted to have stumbled into a costly joke. "Careful, cousin," he said, though Renly was no kin to him. "If words were swords, we would all be bloody by now." Cersei's gaze shifted to Renly and stuck there, as if the sight of Baratheon Black stung her eyes. "Traitor," she said gently, and her mouth made of the word a caress that tried to reshape it into charm. "You mean to rule in your brother's absence." Renly returned that pleasant nothing of a smile. "I mean to keep your son alive. If you love him, be quiet." Varys, "You know you cannot keep them forever." "I need. Keep them one night," Ned said, and then immediately, "Two." He corrected himself because he had to get used to being a man who could. Littlefinger's smile grew a degree. "Ah," he said, and slid away. They kept the night. Joffrey shouted himself hoarse and then whispered horrible wishes with a boy's rich invention until even he grew exhausted by his own ugliness. Myrcella wept once where no one could hear and then slept the dreamless sleep of the exhausted young with a septa at her bedside. Renly's men took turns on the stair. Ned worked by candlelight over his letter to Dragonstone. He had delayed too long out of scruple. He wrote now with a clear hand and a heavy heart, setting down in plain straps of ink what he had found and what he knew, to whom the crown must by law pass. He sealed it hot with the direwolf and gave it to Varley with orders to place it in Maester Pycelle's bag to go on the fastest ship he could hire with Stark coin. He did not tell Pycelle. He did not tell any man more than his hand had to. At dawn, Robert Baratheon came back in a litter, pale and laughing, stinking of wine and boar blood, with Lancel Lannister bewildered and terrified at his master's side. The laughter had the flatness of something beaten thin. By sunset, the fever had him. The Red Keep filled with the heat of worry. The old gods had nothing to do with it, nor the new. Ned went to him when the queen had finished with her tears and soft hands, and had left him alone with the speed of a woman who had been afraid and then had found a new shape for her fear. The king lay under linen that had once been clean. His breath rasped. "Stark," Robert said, voice thick as bread. "Cat-eater, boar. Got me good." "We will find who plied you with wine," Ned said. Robert's laugh made sweat shine on his lip. "Wine was the only friend I had there." He closed his eyes, then opened them again. He turned his head and saw the quill and paper and the seal prepared. "Do it. I cannot move for the pain." Ned wrote the words Robert croaked, but when it came to the naming of an heir, he wrote "my rightful heir" and not a name, and when Robert's eyes met his, Ned held that gaze and did not look aside. He told him then, because he had to, what he had found in lineages and in hair and in the long hungers of the queen. Robert's breath caught and then went ragged as if he were climbing toward something steep. His hand flailed once, found Ned's sleeve, held. "I should have killed them all," Robert said, and it came out thin, rage who had lost weight. "No, I should have been less of a fool. 7 hells take me." He turned his face away and let Ned press the ring to the wax. "Do as you must. Keep them from killing each other before I die, if you ever loved me." "I love you," Ned said, because it was true, and truth ought not to be kept like a coin in a shoe, only brought out when a man was sure it would not be stolen. Robert slept, and within hours afterward he died. King's Landing was a city that learned quickly to pretend. It put on mourning as it would winter cloaks, making sure the fur was displayed to advantage. The bells spoke all day, and men spoke in low voices in the halls and then shouted on the streets. In the Tower of the Hand, Joffrey beat at the door and demanded his mother and then demanded his sword. He got neither. They convened the small council in the Great Solar because Ned would not step into the throne room assuming anything. Renly came with the smell of rose oil and steel to him. Varys drifted like smoke. Pycelle waddled. Littlefinger smiled as if he had swallowed a lemon and found it clever. Barristan Selmy came too, lame from the weight of his armor, face grave. Janos Slint arrived late and sweating despite the cool. Cersei came last, hair bound like a rope of gold, Tommen on her arm with a thumb in his mouth. Ned laid Robert's will upon the table. The wax kept its shape. He read. He heard his own voice as if down a corridor, level and calm. The voice he had used when his sons have fallen from apple trees and needed to be told this was not the end of apples. Cersei did not reach for the paper until he was finished. She did not read it. She tore it into 4 neat pieces and set them down very carefully. "Empty words," she said. "Those are the king's words," Barristan Selmy said heavily. "The king is dead," Cersei answered without a falter. "The matter is before us, not before a corpse." She drew Tommen closer, though it was Joffrey whose name lay unspoken between them. Joffrey will hear the acclamations of the city and sit where his father Saturday. Renly spoke first. "Joffrey sits nowhere until Lord Stark declares the lawful heir." Lord Stark. Her smile was a knife you might cut a peach with if you were careful. "I see why you have seized my children, Renly. You always did like to take things that were not yours." Renly's lips parted. Fury flickered. He swallowed it like a man taught patience by need alone. Ned looked at Selmy. He saw the man look back with pale eyes that had stood over 3 kings and would not flinch now. "Ser Barristan," Ned said, and he did not know until he spoke how deeply he had been in want of the man's support. "I name Lord Stannis Baratheon the rightful heir by blood and by law to the Iron Throne. Letter has gone to Dragonstone. We will hold the city, and the children safe until he arrives. We will declare this to the realm." "Lord Stannis," Renly said, putting an edge of skepticism to the courtesy, "is not a man to inspire joy. Law is not a singer," Ned returned. "It is a wall." Littlefinger's laughter was little more than a breath. "Walls fall," he said. "They tumble when pushed from the right angle." Cersei was watching Ned the way a falcon watches a hare. "You would give my son over to Stannis?" she said softly, almost admiring. "Knowing what he will do. I will give no child over to any man's justy." "See while I breathe," Ned said. He rose, despite his leg, because one has to rise when saying words like those. "Joffrey is in my custody and will remain so. He will be treated with all courtesy due his station in the realm, which is high. He will not be crowned. When Lord Stannis comes, we will determine a course that will keep the peace." Cersei turned her head slightly, as if hearing some small sound. "Janos," she said, still watching Ned. "Bring the gold cloaks." Janos Slint's face had sheen on it. "My lady." "Bring them," she said, in the tone one uses to a restive stallion. Ned stared at the man and saw the scales tipping in his head. Coin and fear, coin and fear. He felt the deep stillness that comes before a choice. "Ser Barristan," Ned said, and something in his voice made every head turn. "Do you serve the crown or the person of the king?" "The crown," Ser Barristan answered without delay. "As it rests truly. I have served men I did not like because they wore it. I will serve men I do not admire because it is my oath. If Lord Stannis is rightful." "He is," Ned said flatly. "Then I will hold with him. I will not take arms against a child, nor permit these others to do it in the king's name." He looked towards Cersei, and something like pity, or perhaps only understanding, moved across that lined, worn face. "My lady, the hand speaks the truth of law." Cersei's lips tightened to a line so thin it could have been a cut. "You were always a tedious man," she said. "Better tedious than false," Barristan returned, and the room was suddenly colder. It should have erupted. Ned had expected eruption, had prepared for it with men poised on the stairs and in narrow halls. Yet the force went out of them in a rush like air from a bellows, because they had been prepared to kill for a king or for themselves, not for the thin ground between. Janos shifted his weight from foot to foot and stood very still. Littlefinger's eyes went half-lidded, calculating angles. Renly's hands tightened on the edge of the table until his knuckles blanched. Varys breathed. "Then we hold," Ned said, claiming the stillness because that was what men who had just taken a city must do. "Make quiet a weapon. We feed the people. We keep the water sweet. We pay the gold cloaks their due. We send letters to every lord of any worth to the east of the Trident. I will tell them what I have told you. Varys, you will see to the ravens. Peter, the coin. Janos, your men will take their orders here." He met each gaze in turn as if measuring a spear by its grain. Peter did not blink. He smiled again. "The coin is always delighted to see me. I will make it dance for you if you pay the piper." He seemed to enjoy his own wit as if no one else could possibly appreciate it properly. Afterward, when the council had been dismissed to their work, Renly lingered like perfume in a doorway. "Ned," he said, and the informality in the use of the name broke like glass after days of titles. "Hear me, crown me, and this is all settled with a song and a feast." Ned sat again because the leg demanded it and because the weight of the next hours had come down like snow. "We are not children in the yard, Renly, to choose sides in a game for want of better things to do before supper. Stannis is rightful." "Rightful," Renly said, and made a joke of the syllables with his mouth while his eyes did not smile. "And friendless. I know the men of the Stormlands. Their hearts are with me. The Tyrells will not follow him, not if you offered them every rose in the 7 kingdoms. They would follow me. Then you will make war on your brother." Ned felt the deep, patient anger that comes when someone refuses to hear plain speech. "Or you will wait until he comes with grim men and ships and he will make war on you, because Stannis is as unbending as iron and twice as likely to sink a boat." Renly's cheekbones sharpened with tension. "My brother has never loved me. He will never love anyone as well as he loves the law. If he comes to the city with a claim you have warmed for him, I shall have no place in it but the lowest stool." He laughed then, and this time the sound was rough. "I have no taste for low stools." "Then leave," Ned said, because he would not lie where it would hurt. "If you cannot swear to hold to the peace until Stannis comes, then go to those who love you and make whatever work you must. Take your 50, your 60, and go. I will not hold you here by gratitude." Renly stared, then smiled with a kind of admiring disbelief. "You are ungovernable," he said. "Very well." He inclined his head. "I will go. I will do it without your leave as I would have done it with it. I offer you one last kindness. Send the girl back to her mother. Myrcella is not part of this game." Ned closed his eyes against the word game because he could smell the blood in it. When Stannis comes, we will talk about hostage and pledge. Not before. Renly nodded once, accepting nothing but seeing that he was not to have it. Then farewell, Lord Stark. I thank you for your courage and for doing as you said you would. It is rare coin in King's Landing. He went like summer going, fast and lightly, with knights in green falling in behind him, the Knight of Flowers a bright point near his shoulder. When Renly was gone, the keep felt emptier for it. Sansa came to Ned with red eyes and a careful posture she had learned from watching queens at table. "He is my prince," she said quietly. "Father, he is doing nothing wrong. He is afraid. I can hear him through the door." Ned wanted to tell her that fear made boys cruel and it made men crueler, but the words were stones better left unthrown. He wanted to say that she had been promised to a crown that did not fit the head it had been shaped for. He said instead, "I will not harm him. I know," she whispered, and then, as if the words had cost a coin each, "May I see him?" Ned considered the corridor, the door, the ear. "S in the walls." "No," he said. "For now, no. But send the boy bread. Send him honey. He is too angry to eat. But hunger makes anger into something worse." Sansa nodded. She was learning. Ned could see it in the way her face arranged itself around disappointment like metal shaped around a form. She left with the lightness of a dancer learning the steps to a tune she did not care for but would dance to because there was nothing else in the hall. Arya was nowhere to be found that afternoon until Syrio Farrell brought her by the ear and presented her with a flourish as if an eel he had charmed from a barrel. "Your girl is a cat," Syrio said. "She finds the high places and the very low ones, and if there is a wall she will insist upon finding the other side of it." Arya glowered and rubbed her ear. "The hound was drinking in the kitchens," she informed her father in a rush. "He does not smell as bad as I thought he would." Ned pinched the bridge of his nose and for a moment wished only for his hall at Winterfell and a bowl of hot stew and boys falling asleep where they sat on the benches. "You will keep to your practice with Syrio and to your needlework with Septa Mordain both," he said. "You will keep to the tower. If I must, I will set guards on your bedchamber and at the privy." She scowled as if the very notion of any guard on any privy were an insult to her many gods. But she nodded and then could not resist. "May I see the princess?" "No," Ned said. "Then may I give her my half of the honeyed figs I took from the kitchen?" Ned considered the heart of a hard truth. "Yes." When Arya put the dish through the open door of Myrcella's room, the two girls looked at each other, surprised and uncertain and then not. Arya had straw in her hair and a smudge of flour on her cheek. Myrcella looked like an illustration for a tale of summer gardens. Arya thrust the dish out. Myrcella received it as if it were a precious bowl in a September. "Thank you," she said. "I want to go home." "Me too," Arya muttered, and then, with the candor the North raises its daughters on. "Your brother is a little monster." Myrcella's gaze fell to her folded hands, and when she lifted it again, there was a kind of stubbornness there that had nothing to do with Lannister pride and everything to do with being 9 years old. "He is my brother." Arya pulled a face. "My brother sometimes thinks he is a lord." She meant Bran, perhaps, or Robb, or maybe both. "He is not." Myrcella's knuckles whitened against each other. "Joffrey will be king," she said, and her voice trembled as the words left her mouth because she had been practicing them in her head and had not understood how hard they would be to put into air. "And everything will be as it should be." Arya looked at her as if she were trying to see which stone to pick up to strike a fruit from a tree, and discovering the tree was planted in different soil altogether. It would have gone on awkwardly if Septa Mordain had not cleared her throat behind them. The door closed. The girls thought of each other all night. Ned slept little, and the weariness in his bones felt different from any camp weariness. News went through King's Landing like needles stitching a sail. Renly had taken 20 men in the night and gone for the Rose Road, the Knight of Flowers bright in his train. Joffrey's absence was being whispered in the brothels, wept over in the kitchens, laughed at on the steps of Baelor. September Tywin Lannister had moved to the Green Fork, then further. His host was fed and clothed and ruthless. Robb Stark, his son, would read different letters than the ones he had read in another tale. On the third day, the first raven from Dragonstone came back. It bore Stannis' seal unbroken, with only a short note in a cold, small hand. I come. He would bring his ships. He would bring his iron men and his harder ways. He would bring, perhaps, a red woman with foreign gods, and Ned set the thought aside the way a man sets aside horseflies when he must attend to worse. Cersei tried once more. Janos Slynt brought all the gold cloaks he could muster to the base of the Tower of the Hand and called up that he was there for the prince. Barristan Selmy came, too, in gleaming white. He stood with his hand on the hilt of his sword and looked up at Ned's men on the balcony. Varys drifted between them like a man in a market, clucking about the heat. Cersei herself had not come. She had sent Tommen to the Sept with one of the white cloaks and a purse for the poor and prayers for the dead. "You tempt civil war," Janos shouted, and his voice echoed against old stone. "I prevent one," Ned answered. "Stand down. You will not enter." Janos looked to his left and to his right for orders he had already received and had found heavy. He then looked to Barristan and found none. Barristan said, "Do not be a fool." Janos Slynt did not draw steel. He dismissed half the men to the walls. He left the other half staring up at the men on the balcony. Littlefinger lingered in the shadows and smiled with his mouth while his eyes measured distances. Varys murmured that he would go ensure that the kitchens sent cold beer to the men, that thirsty soldiers became thoughtless soldiers, and who wanted that? Stannis came in on a wind that stank of tar. The ships that preceded him flew the crowned stag, dark on gold. The sails smacked in the breeze like flat hands. The city had continued to pretend at morning and then had forgotten it. It remembered now to mutter about usurpers who were brothers and about men who lived in granite houses by the sea. Men hung from the walls to watch the procession, and mothers told their cake-faced children to keep their voices down. He was not a glorious sight, not Stannis Baratheon. He was a man made of gristle and iron, tight as a drumhead, skin stretched thin over stubborn bones. He had eyes that had never been soothed by praise and never softened by indulgence. He had Davos Sea, Worth at his shoulder, a small, wiry man with the hands of a sailor and a calm to him like deep water. They came with 60 men of the island, and then more when the galleys poured them out belly after belly onto the quays. They did not sing. They did not cheer. They moved like a tide and like one. They did not regard permission. Ned met him in the yard because the throne room was a place of theater and he had no appetite for plays. Stannis clasped his arm once and looked him over without warmth. "You have done a hard thing," he said, which was as near to praise as a man like that ever went. "I have done a necessary thing," Ned said. "That is the same thing," Davos murmured, and his eyes, unlike his lord's, had kindness in them. They did not draw out ceremony. Stannis would have liked to take his seat without witnesses and write the realm's new shape with letters to be carried by birds. But men must see so they can begin to believe. They took the hall, then, full of banners and of stale air. Cersei came in white, stiff as if carved. Tommen held her hand and blinked at the torchlight as if unsure what shadows could do. Joffrey did not enter because Ned did not allow it. He was set instead on a stool in his room with Harwin standing in the door and the Hound sitting in a chair like a carved thing that would come to life only if trouble moved first. Barristan Selmy stood before the Iron Throne and spoke, briefly and without poetry, of law. Pycelle shuffled forward with a genealogy and a wheeze and spoke of hair and fathers. Varys lifted his soft hands once as if wanting to gather the city to his breast and then let them drop. Peter chuckled at a moment that was not a joke to anyone else. Stannis walked to the foot of the throne and put his hand on it, fingers splayed as if to feel how it breathed. "I claim," Stannis said, and his voice carried, "I claim by rights of blood and law. My brother made me no gifts. I take no gifts from the dead. I take what is mine." He looked toward Cersei then, and there was a bare touch of pity in his hard gaze for a woman who had gambled and lost. "I will have the boy brought to me and will judge him. He will not die by men's hands while he is a child and under my peace." Cersei smiled in answer, a bleak thing that was more about bones than lips. "Your peace," she said, and a murmur ran through the hall like a rat on a rope. "You may have peace, Lord Stannis, in your hard little house. You will not have my son. You have him now only because Lord Stark keeps him from men who would take him. Be grateful," Stannis said. He took his hand from the throne and turned, an old knight's movement that implied nothing but was close to a threat if you knew him. "Lord Stark, bring the boy. He will stand in my presence and hear my judgment, which shall not be his death." Ned hesitated for a heartbeat because he knew Stannis's judgment would be a wall with no door. Then he sent Harwin, and the walk up the stairs had never seemed so long. Joffrey came down between two Stark men with jaw set and eyes bright with a mad, brittle heat. He looked around as if he could find somewhere to spit that would hurt, and finding none, he spat at the floor. He stopped before the dais. He had garments on that had cost more coin than the entire village of Queenscrown would see in a year. He stood like a prince and vibrated like an arrow fired into a tree. "You will let me go," he said. "You will all bow." "No," Stannis said. The word was a hammer. The room seemed to take a step backward. Joffrey blinked rapidly, like a man slapped awake. "I am the king," he insisted, because he had lived his whole life in houses where saying a thing made it true. "My mother is the queen." "Your mother is a traitor," Stannis said. "You are a bastard of incest. If I were the man you fear, you would die here for it. I am not. You will be confined to quarters in the Red Keep and will not be harmed. When the realm is settled, you will go to the Rock or to some lesser house that will keep you, or to the Citadel if you have a mind for learning, which I very much doubt. If you are wise, you will live a long time and be forgotten by those who look toward thrones." Joffrey stared at him and then at Ned, not understanding, the canyon of it so wide between what he wanted to be true and what he was hearing that nothing could bridge it. He laughed, a little high sound. "You cannot. You cannot." "I can," Stannis said. "Lord Stark, see it done." Noise breached the hall like surf. Men were shouting because when a thing is done, someone must shout that it is otherwise, if only to carry the old world a few paces further. Cersei tried to break from the man at her side, Meryn Trant, oafish and fat, and would have flung herself to claw and tear, but Barristan Selmy moved with a speed that put shame to his age and put a hand on her arm. She stopped because the gesture was not force. It was respect, and nothing burns like being held with respect by a man you can neither frighten nor sway. They took the boy away. He walked with dignity because pride is a kind of armor. He cursed in a thin ribbon that made the men around him flinch, and he even found the cunning to turn his head and say to Sansa, who stood near a pillar with Septa Mordane, "You will never be queen," as if that could hurt a girl who had slept on stones made of that knowledge for days. Sansa swayed where she stood, but she did not cry. She went home afterward to her needlework and put every stitch in square. The city learned a new rhythm under Stannis. It was a hard rhythm and not loving. He cared little for ceremony and less for joy. He spent coin carefully and demanded work of the men who had learned under Robert to drink away afternoons and then throw feasts with borrowed gold. Peter Baelish found himself explaining the ways of debt as if to a man who had never once eaten beyond his appetite. Stannis listened, and when Peter finished with something lick, an ironic flourish, Stannis said, "If we cannot pay it, we do not buy it." And Peter smiled and then walked into a dark room and kicked a chair and then smiled again and went on finding coins as if they grew on trees after all. Cersei, deprived of her crown and her boy's public presence, took Tommen and tried twice to leave the city. The first time Varys sent a kindly old fishmonger to bar a postern gate with a cart that lost its wheel and caused a delay long enough for Stark men to arrive. The second time she tried the river, in a boat crewed by Sellswords who loved coin more than fear, and who were then persuaded by a greater purse to tie their boat loosely enough that the current took it back to the wrong dock. She took to her rooms and drank. She took Lancel to her bed and whispered war into a boy's ear simply because she could not abide the thought of losing any battle anywhere to anyone. News came from the Riverlands, cold and sharp. Tywin's men had burned 8 villages along the Tumblestone. Edmure Tully was in the field with what he could raise. Ser Brynden the Blackfish fought like an old wolf without pack enough to surround him. Robb Stark called banners at Winterfell, but his letters to King's Landing were not declarations of storm and steel. They were careful and they were sad. He asked what his father needed. Ned wrote back words that were unusual in such skins. Wait, watch, defend. It is too soon to risk all our lives and all our dead. Rob read and paced before the heart tree at Winterfell, and then obeyed because he had spent his boyhood learning the shape of obedience and the dignity in it. Renly sent a letter on a rose-scented parchment. It spoke of banners and trumpets and the crowd's love and the names of lords whose fealty he had drawn to him like fish to a bright lure. It did not mention Stannis. It did not mention the law. It mentioned a wedding to come. Ned read it and burned it and said a prayer for a man who would not live as long as he deserved if he insisted on living as brightly as he did. On a morning with a low, pewter sky, Davos Seaworth stood at Ned's shoulder on the ramparts and told a story about being a younger, poorer smuggler under a different king who had no thought for such men. Ned listened because he wanted to understand men he must stand beside. Davos spoke because he wanted to understand the man beside whom he stood. "You cut off my fingers," Davos said without drama, looking at his hand with its blunt ends. "It was just, I had broken a law. He knighted me. It was kind. I had saved men who would have died with their lawfulness intact and their bellies empty. Both were true. I follow him because he does both and can live with having done both." Ned thought of the children in his tower, the boy with his spitting hate, the girl with her folded hands. He thought of his own girls, of his sons. The wind off the bay cut between his ribs. "Justice without mercy is only a slower cruelty," he said, half to himself. Davos glanced at him, then back at the bay where gulls wheeled like bits of torn parchment thrown into the air. "Aye," he said, "but mercy without thought is only a quicker one." Later that day, Sandor Clegane came to the Tower of the Hand with his sword strapped low and a flagon of something that steamed faintly in the cool. "For the boy," he said, chin jerking toward the stairs. "He will not drink what your men bring him." "He will drink that?" Ned asked, eyeing the steam. It smelled like cloves and a bitterer thing underneath. "He will drink anything he thinks someone else wants," Sandor said. He looked at Ned as if he were a problem that did not need solving. "I am not so fond of princes that I would save them for joy, Stark, but I do not hold with killing them either. Keep your men from me and I will keep mine from you." "What is the difference?" Ned asked, and the hound's laugh was a bark that held no humor. "The difference is you still have all your face," Sandor said, and went up to the boy he guarded because he always had and because loyalty is a kind of disease that takes hold where pain once lived. As the weeks passed, Myrcella grew quieter and, oddly, a little braver. She asked to read in the solar that faced the sea. She sometimes sat alone and looked at the water as if she could read future and past both in its shifting skins. She thanked everyone. She began to teach Arya to plait her hair in the southern style because, as she explained, "If I have nothing else to give, I can give that." Arya endured it once and then laughed and pulled her hair free and said, "I like it wild." And Myrcella laughed then too and said, "So do I, but no one lets me." Sansa came less often, and when she did she brought some needlework she did not look at. She had learned that every time she saw Joffrey she bled a little dignity and did not have endless blood to give. Septa Mordain taught her to pray for wisdom, and she prayed for it as if it were a thing you could ask of gods like bread from a baker and then hold in your hands. She grew, all unknowing, into something calmer and stonier. She watched the queen from doorways and learned caution. Cersei's rage was a constant. She did not roar. She did not throw goblets. She turned her fury into iced manners and into plots like rats breeding in a granary. She stoked her father's wrath with letters that were part confession and part accusation. She wrote to Jaime, who sat in his gilded armor in a camp that shifted, who smiled at men because he had learned to and who sharpened his sword because it made him feel like he had done something. She wrote letters by candlelight while Lancel, bare-chested and malleable, slept in her bed and dreamed of being a man. She waited, and Tywin did not wait. The old lion moved pieces that had been placed long ago. Jaime swept up a dozen river lords and scattered them, then found himself drawn toward Riverrun because men will always move toward the heart if to their nature. Tyrion Lannister, who had escaped one foolish trial by a sickly boy in an airy castle, tramped under the weight of armor. He wore poorly with a cluster of mountain men who liked killing for coin and for sport because the two so often came as a pair. He arrived at his father's tent with a face composed of wit and exhaustion. He read Cersei's letters and poured himself good red wine and wondered which madness to address first. "Children," Tywin said without pity when he had done reading. "They assume life will yield if they demand loudly enough. You will go to King's Landing." Tyrion smiled thinly. "You have mistaken me for my brother." "He is trapped in a hall of fish," Tywin said. He lifted a hand, and something like affection, which in him wore the aspect of mild tolerance, passed over his face. "We will get him out of it. For now, I need eyes and a tongue in that city that are not Cersei's." "I have never found my sister's tongue to be any good fortune to me," Tyrion said, but he was already calculating the road and the bribes and the brothels he would avoid, because now was not the time to die of pox or of being found in the wrong bed by the wrong husband. He looked at the map again, the lines of rivers, the stones of castles. "And what of the boy?" Tywin's jaw set, then eased. "If he can be traded, he will be. If not, he will be saved for the sake of his name if we can. He is my daughter's son, and my sister's monster," Tyrion murmured, but very quietly, almost gently, because not all truths are meant to be thrown in men's faces like cards. The city waited for the next move. In the meantime, it had to breathe and eat. Bread was bought. The harbor had to be kept clear of rot. The gold cloaks, still sneeringly called Janos's boys by men with better humor than sense, had to be paid their coin on the day, or else they began to forget which doors to keep shut. Varys moved like silk, whispering among women who changed sheets and men who changed the buckets under privies, and brought Ned truths that were not useful and one truth that was. They would try again, and this time not with gold cloaks or in the day. They came at night, quieter than the first. Cersei's sellswords had coiled in the shadow of the kitchens, listening to the hoarse snores of men who had overtrusted the beer brought by Varys's boys. One of the white cloaks, Meryn, led them, or perhaps he followed. It was hard to tell, as he had the look of a dull animal with a fondness for yes. They had a key. Keys multiply in cities like rats. They slipped through and up, and would have been in the corridor outside Myrcella's door before Harwin could draw breath to shout. Had Sandor Clegane not been sitting, absurdly, on the floor against the wall across from Joffrey's chamber, half asleep with his sword laid over his knees. The first sellsword stepped into a wedge of torchlight. The hound's eyes came open. He watched them the way a hound watches a line of geese. "We're here for the Queen's will," the sellsword said, idiotically honest. Sandor did not laugh. He stood. He was faster than a big man should be. The first man died so quietly that the second did not realize it until he felt the blood slick under his boot. Then he was dead too, and Meryn Trant belatedly thought it wise to draw steel. Harwin had his horn to his lips. He blew once, a rude, brassy sound that woke half the tower. Men appeared from doors like ants from disturbed earth. There was chaos, which is the city's native language. There was steel, which is a language men bleed to speak. Arya, who had been sleeping with Needle under her pillow like a little truth she had carried from the north, woke and rolled to her feet. Septa Mordane, who had been dreaming of a quiet summer in the Vale, prayed herself hoarse. Myrcella stood with hair unbound, and held her own door shut with all the strength in her small arms. When it was done, for sellswords bled on the stones, and one stark man with a cut that would scar his cheek. Meryn Trant lived, but only because Sandor, with a sneer, nudged him away with his boot rather than finishing him. There are men whose lives are a punishment too valuable to waste. Ned came limping fast, the splint biting so hard he had to lean on Desmond's shoulder for the last steps. He took in the dead, the living, the closeness to the door with the girl pressed against it, and the hound, who wiped his sword on his own sleeve with slow, ugly care. "You have my thanks," Ned said to Sandor without adornment. "I did not do it for you," Sandor replied. "I did it because the boy is my shield to hold." He looked down at Joffrey's door, listened to the rant within, and added, flat as hammered iron, "And because the other choice was to open this room for them, and I have not yet decided to be that sort of dog." In the morning, Stannis had Meryn Trant expelled from the Kingsguard. He would have had him whipped if Selmy, stiff with disgust, had not said, "There are proprieties," with a contempt that made the words themselves into lashes. Meryn left the city within a day, face pale, hands trembling as if they believed themselves still meant for higher service, and found his way back to the rock where men like him are kept and used. Sometime after that, a quiet deputation came under truce. It had a Lannister banner and a man with the sharp, small smile of someone whose tongue is cleverer than his sword. Tyrion Lannister rode a donkey because it made men underestimate him, and in his experience that was safer and more entertaining. He came into the yard under the eyes of half the city, because King's Landing is not a place where anything is done in private if it can be done in view of 10, each of whom will repeat it with improvements. And he dismounted with a wince he turned into a flourish. Ned went to meet him. They regarded each other with old knowledge. That day in the yard at Winterfell when the dwarf had asked to see the wall, the half smile that was not mockery, the way the North had a taste for men who made do with what the gods had given them. "Lord Stark," Tyrion said, "I wish we might meet somewhere less fatal to pleasant conversation. I am told conversation has killed men, too," Ned said, and Tyrion's laugh was warm despite all. "I come to arrange a shape for a future in which fewer boys hang and fewer girls weep," Tyrion said, "or to learn that such a shape is impossible, in which case I will go away and tell my father that he may build his future with swords and see if he likes the cost." "You have no power to bargain," Stannis said when he arrived, as he arrived everywhere, like a door shutting. "I have power to speak," Tyrion returned. "It is sometimes more than enough. My lord, your claim is not in question here. The question is what becomes of my niece and my nephew. My claim is always in question until every man who could question it is dead or convinced," Stannis said. "Speak quickly." Tyrion inclined his head the slightest shade. "The girl may be wed to Dorne," he said. "My father would not refuse such a match if it meant peace. It gives her a life and gives you a balm for the wound you took in taking her. As for the boy will not be king," Stannis said. "The boy cannot be king," Tyrion said softly, and the softness altered the meaning and made of it something like pity. "But he can be used as a sword or as a token. Tokens are cheaper." "I will not send him to the rock," Ned said. He felt Sansa's breath somewhere in the room as if she were listening through a wall no thicker than a cloak. "Not to be raised in that house by that woman." Tyrion's eyes flicked, briefly, as if hearing the truth in the shape of the name Mother. "Then to the Citadel," he said. "Let the boy learn. If he cannot be a man for the world, let him be a man for books. He will be guarded. He will not die. My sister will adjust." Stannis looked at him with stony interest, as if he had found a kind of rock he had not known existed and was displeased that the world had made one without his leave. "A prince in gray," he said. "It has the smell of justice without the taste." "It has the taste of survival," Tyrion said. "And that is a dish the city must learn to enjoy unless it plans to eat itself." In the end, they made a bargain because men like to tell themselves when they make bargains that they are giving something to a higher thing, when what they are doing is saving the things they love from the things they fear. Myrcella would be fostered in Dorne under the eye of those who valued hostages and honor both. There were letters sent and a ship prepared, and Sansa wept alone because she liked Myrcella and had liked her more for having given her figs. Joffrey would go to the Citadel when the roads were safe enough to send him with a real escort, not a show. He did not weep, because he had scorched that place in himself. He broke a chair and cut his own hand and yelled when it bled, hideously, like the boy he was. Cersei did not forgive any of them. Tywin did not forgive them either, but he folded the letter that had the terms in it and set it next to a candle and read it again and then put it away. He moved his host because that is what he did when he could not go forward. The old man circled and circled until his enemies began to tire, and then he struck. Renly crowned himself on a sunny morning with the Tyrell roses scattered at his feet and banners snapping like polite applause in a breeze. And by then the lines had been drawn and men had decided which oaths were made of oak and which of reed. War came anyway, because it is the end of such stories and the beginning. It came differently. The first battles were in fields that would otherwise have seen harvest, and the first dead men wore different colors. The city held. No boy screamed from high stone. No father had to watch it. Ned went off into the Godswood in the Red Keep, a thin, sad thing with a tree that had never learned what snow felt like. He talked to it as if it could carry words north, as if words had legs. He talked to Caitlin in his head and to Robb in his letters. He spoke only business to Stannis and only caution to Peter Baelish. He laughed once a day with Varys because it was necessary to remember that a laugh was not treason. When the ship took Myrcella, Arya twisted her fingers together and watched until it was a handspan of white against the blue. Myrcella stood on the stern and held her chin high. The wind caught her hair and made it a banner for a moment, then smoothed it down. She did not look back, and that was her courage. Joffrey did not say farewell to anyone. He went to the citadel under guard. The Hound went with him to the city gates and stood looking out after the dust the way a dog will watch a road. When Ned came to stand beside him, Sandor said without looking, "I will not follow him where he is going." "You would have killed for him," Ned said. "I would have killed for anyone who paid me to wear their sword," Sandor returned. Then he made a low, ugly sound that might have been a laugh. "But not forever, not in a place with no air." Ned thought of a boy in gray walking under stone, of a girl headed for a dry land where orange blossoms perfumed the air even at dusk. He thought of a boy in the north with a crown that was not yet made. The city breathed around him, always hungry, always watching. The realm had not been saved. It rarely is. It had been held in a new shape for a time. You could call that victory or respite. Men would call it whichever best suited the songs they wanted to sing later. He called it work. That night he dreamed of Winterfell, of the yard with its packed snow and the sound of wood on wood as boys hit one another gently because that was what boys did when they were happy enough to play. He woke to the cry of gulls and the scratch of a quill in the next room. Stannis would be writing orders. Varys would be writing reports. Peter would be writing notes with jokes tucked in them like knives wrapped in flowers. He rose and wrapped his cloak about him, wincing at a leg that would never forget. He tightened a strap on his splint and went to meet the day. The Red Keep was awake, eyes everywhere, kitchens redolent with onions and the sweat of men who had to feed those who would decide whether they should eat. Ned passed a pair of gold cloaks at a corner. One nodded, the other looked away. He passed the Knight of Flowers, recently arrived with letters from his king, and returned the courteous bow the young man made because courtesy costs nothing and can buy a great deal if you pay it to the right men at the right time. In the passage that led to the Tower of the Hand, Arya hurtled around a corner, hair wild, eyes bright, breath coming fast. She nearly collided with him and then caught herself with a dancer's feline balance. "Father," she said, "Syrio says I must learn to fight the men who are not becoming my enemies." "Everyone becomes your enemy if you treat them poorly," Ned said. She flashed him a grin that would have been savage if it had not been so unformed. "Then I will be kind," she said, and raced away, light and fierce. Sansa sat with Septa Mordain on a bench with sunlight catching the fine hairs at her temple and making a halo of them she would never see. She sewed. Her hands moved with a grace learned with tears, and her mouth was steady. She would never love Joffrey. She would learn to love other things. They endured. The city endured. In the months that followed, men died in places with names that songs would later improve, and new oaths were spoken over bones and old ones turned to dust with the breath of men who had sworn them. But nothing worse came to pass within those walls than the things men had already done to each other 1,000 times and would do again because they are men. There would be other wars. There always are. There would be nights when the Red Keep felt like a beast breathing on the backs of men's necks. There would be letters from the north with news of wolves and snows and of a boy learning how to wear a mantle that bit his shoulders with its weight. There would be ships, always ships, and on some of them men with eyes like coals who spoke of kings across the sea and dragons that might be fire or only desire. But if there is any justice in such tales, it is the justice of having chosen when it was hard. Ned had chosen. Renly had chosen. Cersei had chosen. Stannis chose every hour of every day, and Davos helped him bear it. One morning much later, when the mists lay heavy on the bay and even the bells seemed muted, Ned stood again with Davos. The black-sailed ships had come, the ones that moved like crows. Messages were piled like driftwood. Varys's whispers had grown warm with the strange scent of the east. Ned's hair had gone a shade grayer over the temple. He looked down at the city that had not forgiven him and had not devoured him because he would not let it. "I never liked the South," he said conversationally, and Davos laughed. "A low, kind thing. The South doesn't much like itself," Davos said. "But sometimes it remembers how to be more than its own appetites." Ned watched a market open Lamslow, the fruit piled, the fish laid, the early buyers haggling because haggling keeps the hands warm. He thought of a girl in Dorne learning to speak softer and mean more, of a boy in gray who might, if left in quiet long enough, discover that books do not bite, of a brother in green who had filled fields with flowers and would fill them with bones before the summer was out. He thought of a winter that did not care for any of it and that would ask each man sooner or later what he had done when the chance was before him. "I did as I must," Ned said aloud, "not to be forgiven, not to be praised, but to be reminded." "Yes," Davos said. He clapped his hand once on Ned's shoulder and then withdrew it, respectful not of stations but of the weight a man had to carry himself. "Most men cannot say even that."